Welcome to the recording of the webinar titled What the New Vegetation Management Laws Mean for Managing Mulga in South West Queensland. This webinar was presented on the 16th of July by Seamus Batstone from the Department of Natural Resources, Mines and Energy. This is part one in a series of short recordings from this webinar and is titled Overview of the Changes in the Vegetation Management Laws.
So what are we talking about with the vegetation management laws? The Vegetation Management Act 1999 and the Planning Act 2016. So those are the two acts that we're operating. All of this stuff that we're going to talk today is under. What are the big changes for out here? So probably the big one is that the self-assessable code for managing thickened vegetation is gone. So if you want to do managing thickened vegetation, you'll have to get a permit. We've got a link a bit later on to look at those permits. There have been some changes to the FODA self-assessable code or accepted development clearing code. There's high value regrowth on Cat C freehold if you didn't have a PMAV. We have got a handful of those people who didn't get PMAVs and now have a bit of Cat C on their freehold land. They're one of the priorities for the Charleville and Roma teams is looking at how we help those people. There's also been a redefinition of high value regrowth. So now it's defined as vegetation that hasn't been cleared for the last 15 years, and it's a regional ecosystem. It applies to leasehold, freehold land, Indigenous land, and occupational licences. That's obviously if you haven't got a PMAV. So if you've got it locked in as Category X previously, that's not going to worry you. Some of the other changes that affect us out here, there's increased habitat and environmental protection. So you'll see that there's more essential habitat mapping than there used to be. And that does affect you if you're harvesting mulga. How we find out about that is we download one of the property reports and you'll find your essential habitat mapped in there. There's been a removal of provisions permitting clearing for high value agriculture and irrigated high value agriculture. So there used to be a code assessment to deal with that. That's gone as part of these changes. Obviously, it doesn't affect people so much out here as people more coastal. Just having said that, I have talked to the policy guys, and there's some scope for coordinated projects. So when you're looking at agricultural projects of state significance, there's still some room to move there with big agricultural projects. Monitoring and compliance changes. So penalty units increase for offences. The size of area changed for PINs and expanding power of entry. The middle one is the important one for out here because once upon a time, so a penalty infringement notice could be issued for a maximum area of, I think it was about 10 hectares of least concern. What that meant for people out here was, if you did over that area, there's really only a couple of options. One is to go to court, and one is restoration notice and things like that. You couldn't issue a smaller sort of fine, whereas now that's possible. You know, when we see some fodder harvesting that probably doesn't leave anything behind, you know, there can be issued a penalty infringement notice rather than having to take it to court. So one of the big changes that doesn't really affect us out here, unless you're calling in from Roma and you're a bit north of Roma, is the Category R mapping. So the Category R mapping, which is the reef catchments mapping, that now affects a bunch of new catchments further south in the state. So as you can see from the slide there, Burnett Mary is affected, Eastern Cape York, Fitzroy, Burdekin, McKay, Sundays and Wet Tropics. So just once again, if you're north of Roma, just have a look at that. If you're calling in from somewhere else in the state, obviously, you know, that could affect you too. But for our southwestern guys, you'll find some stuff where it flows into the Dawson catchment and then into the Fitzroy. That stuff's affected now.
Thank you for watching this part of the recording of the webinar of What the New Vegetation Management Laws Mean for Managing Mulga in South West Queensland, which was recorded on the 16th of July 2018.